start by Thank you, Paige. Um, we're going to start by looking at writing measurable and demonstrable outcomes and developing meaningful assessments out of those outcomes that you've written, and then how to develop alternative assessments to the sort of traditional seated proctored exam. So we're going to begin at the very beginning, which is writing outcomes. Why do we write outcomes in the first place? So outcome alignment begins actually well before we design our individual courses and assessments and activities. Faculty-driven outcomes generally come as the final piece of a much larger assessment strategy that's designed to evaluate the effectiveness of courses, of departments, divisions, and entire institutions, and how well they prepare students in any given degree program. That evaluation, which we get from all of those outcomes, results in data that is used to drive changes in curriculum, in courses, in program requirements. It also enables institutions to demonstrate their ability to effectively prepare their students for the workforce, for more advanced learning, and it enables them to defend their accrediting status as well. So outcomes at the institutional level tend to be very broadly stated, and they narrow as they move down through programs, divisions, departments. The closer we get to course outcomes, the more specific those outcomes tend to be. At the course level, learning outcomes should in some way align with those broader outcomes that are written at the departmental or the program level. If you're writing course outcomes for a gen ed course, if you're teaching a general education course, then certainly you'd have at least one outcome that is aligned to your institution's gen ed outcomes. If you teach a course that is taught in a specific program, like nursing, for example, then you would have departmental and program level outcomes that you would want to align your content to. Your course level outcomes should always inform and directly align with your planned instructional activities and your assessments. So those outcomes are what should drive the planning in your course. When we start with outcomes, we then know how to develop our assessments, because the assessment tells us whether the student has mastered that outcome. And once we've developed our assessments, then we finally know how to develop our instructional activities. Because if we already know what the goal is, and we know how we're going to assess that goal, now we can determine what kind of instructional activities students need in order to master that goal and be successful in the assessment. At their core, course learning outcomes articulate the knowledge and skills that students should have mastered by the end of your course. They should be student-centered, demonstrable, and measurable. So those last two words I want us to take a closer look at, because this is an area that sometimes trips people up. Well-written learning outcomes are those that are both measurable, meaning that you are able to measure a student's mastery of the outcome, and they're demonstrable, meaning that students are able to demonstrate their mastery through some cognitive behavior. The most common error in writing learning outcomes stems from selecting a behavior that either cannot be measured or that students cannot demonstrate. And here I've given you a very simple example. Students will understand the Civil War is not a well-written outcome because it's not really possible to measure a student's understanding, right, of something. How do we measure a student's understanding of something? Nor is it possible for the student to demonstrate her understanding. Instead, we should write, students will identify the underlying causes of the Civil War. In this outcome, we can both measure the student's ability to identify the causes of the Civil War, and the student can likewise demonstrate her ability to do so. So once we have considered our outcomes in terms of measurement and performance or demonstrability, we have to also consider the level of rigor and prior learning or scaffolding, right, that must be in place in order for a student to master that outcome. There are two primary educational theorists that we turn to when we think about how to develop measurable and demonstrable outcomes and aligning those outcomes to our course assessments: Harold Bloom and Norman Webb. Probably most of you have heard of Harold Bloom and Bloom's taxonomy. Webb and his depth of knowledge theory is not as commonly known, but we're going to talk about it just a little bit in this webinar. So Bloom asks us to consider the intellectual behavior that we are asking our students to demonstrate, right? So he's saying, ask our students to demonstrate their knowledge or their mastery. And he divided that demonstration, he divided those behaviors into 6 levels, from the lowest cognitive order, which is a demonstration of basic knowledge or memorization, to the highest, which would be original creation. Each level depicts a different step in cognitive rigor. Webb, on the other hand, asks us to evaluate the rigor of our assessments, or how we measure a student's mastery of an outcome. So Bloom is asking us to look at the demonstrable part of our outcome, right? How do students demonstrate that they've mastered the outcome? And Webb is asking us to measure, to look at the measurement part of that outcome. How do we measure a student's mastery of the outcome? So we're going to start by looking at how Bloom's taxonomy can help inform our approach to writing well-constructed learning outcomes. So it's important to consider the expected level of intellectual behavior as it fits into not only the programmatic curriculum, the curriculum of your program, but also at the course level and the course level content. So for example, if you're teaching an introductory 100 level course, you would likely not begin the semester with the expectation that students would be able to apply, analyze, evaluate, or create using the course content, right? You would expect that they would come in with virtually no knowledge. It's a 100 level introductory course, so you're not going to expect them to come in being able to perform certain cognitive behaviors right off the bat. However, if you were teaching a capstone course at the end of a student's program of study, you would have a much higher expectation of the intellectual behavior for your students. Certainly, you would expect that they would have already mastered the lower levels, right? Remember, understand, and apply. We would expect if the student's coming into a capstone course, that they would have already mastered those levels. And so then you, as the instructor, would therefore write course learning outcomes that reflect the level of intellectual behavior your students should be able to demonstrate at the course level in which they are. So there are loads of great lists on the internet for specific intellectual behaviors. These are the verbs that we talk about in our outcomes at each level of Bloom's taxonomy. Here I've given you just a few to think about, because we're going to get ready to practice drafting our own course learning outcome. We're going to write just one, and we're going to practice with it today a little bit. Okay, so let's take a look at how we actually write a well-constructed learning outcome. So effective and well-constructed learning outcomes generally contain 3 parts. There's a condition under which the resulting behavior is to be performed. Remember, it's that demonstration of mastery. There's an observable or demonstrable behavior that is described in concrete terms. We want to be as specific as possible. And there's a criterion that shows how well the student can demonstrate mastery of that behavior. That gives us our measurement component. All right. So I've got 3 different outcomes here that we can take a look at that in terms of the condition, the behavior, and the criterion. So the first is, given a list and values of a company's assets and liabilities, the student will, so there's our student focused, right? Construct a balance sheet. Construct is our verb, with 90% of the correct asset values. That's our criterion. So that's what we say, that's how we're going to measure mastery of this outcome. Students are going to be able to construct a balance sheet with 90% of the correct asset values. When students can do that, then we know that they've mastered that outcome. Let's look at another one. Given a set of data, the student will calculate the standard deviation within 0.01 of the correct measure. Again, we've got a condition. So we're gonna set the condition, the learning and the assessment condition. Given a set of data, we're gonna give them data. The student will, that's our student focused, student centered. Calculate, that's our Bloom's verb, right? The standard deviation, and then within 0.01 of the correct measure. That's how we know whether the student has mastered the outcome. The last one we're going to look at again later in the webinar. We're going to look at it here. Using course notes and a Venn diagram template. So here are the tools that we're going to give them. Here's the condition of the assessment. The student will compare and contrast the ideology and political characteristics of 2 early American presidents with at least 5 characteristics for each president. Okay, so some samples, the anatomy of an outcome there. First activity, I've given you a little refresher here. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to take just 2 minutes, and don't overthink this. Okay, I'd like you to draft one course learning outcome that articulates some knowledge or skill that students should master by the end of your course. All right, one small thing that a student should master by the end of your course, a piece of knowledge or a skill they should be able to master by the end of your course. Be sure to select the level of Bloom's taxonomy that you feel is appropriate, depending on your course, right? What level is appropriate, and use a verb that's both demonstrable and measurable. It doesn't have to be one on the list here, but those are just to get you started. Include a condition. What are you going to give them? What's the assessment condition? A cognitive behavior, that's your Bloom's verb, and a criterion. How will you determine what determines mastery of that outcome? I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay, so if you want to share your learning outcome drafts in the chat, you should feel free to do so. I'd love to see everyone sharing their outcomes and talking about them in the chat as we continue to move forward. So now that we know exactly what our outcome is, so we have a pretty good draft of what our outcome is and what students must be able to do in order to demonstrate mastery of that outcome, we now have a clear path towards scaffolding our instruction and instructional activities, as well as to developing meaningful assessments that we will use to measure the student's mastery of that outcome. We're gonna return back. We're gonna take a closer look at how Bloom and Webb can help inform that process. So Bloom's taxonomy, remember, helps us to assess and scaffold our instruction, okay? Bloom's taxonomy is about assessing and scaffolding our instruction. We will know that our instruction is effective when students can demonstrate a certain level of mastery. That's how we know that our instruction has been effective. In this way, Bloom's taxonomy requires that students master the lower levels of cognition before moving on to the next. And this is what we mean when we talk about scaffolding instruction. Students have to understand the lower levels before they can move on to perform more and more complex and rigorous cognitive behaviors and tasks. So if, for example, the objective is to have students use a mathematical formula, let's say, okay? So if we want them to use a mathematical formula, that is at the apply level, that's application, all right? The student must first, before they can apply that learning, before they can perform or use a mathematical formula, they have to first be able to identify that formula, that's at the remember level, and they have to understand the formula's basic purpose. That's at the understand level. So you see, in this way, Bloom's taxonomy helps us to scaffold our instruction. We want to make sure that students have mastered particular cognitive knowledge and behaviors before we move them up into more rigorous behaviors. Webb's depth of knowledge, on the other hand, helps us to evaluate or assess our assessments. Okay, so Bloom's helps us to assess our instruction. Webb looks at the rigor or the level of complexity of our assessments, the assessments that we build to identify whether students have mastered that learning. Webb's framework consists of 4 levels, level 1 being the simplest, and moving up through level 4, which is the most complex level of assessment. Remember, when we're talking about depth of knowledge, we're talking about the assessment, what the assessment is asking students to do. In the same example of using a mathematical formula to solve a problem, when we apply, and remember that when we said we were going to ask students to perform use a mathematical formula to solve a problem, that left us with Bloom's level 3, right? The application level. When we apply Webb's depth of knowledge to the assessment, which is asking them to solve a problem, we can see that it's actually quite complex. Students are recalling the information or the formula, that's depth of knowledge 1, in order to solve the problem, which involves depth of knowledge 2, the application, and depth of knowledge 3, analysis. And depending on the complexity of the problem to be solved, the learning, that assessment might even transition into depth of knowledge 4. Which is extended augmentation, extended thinking that requires students to go beyond the standard and asking how they can use this learning in real world contexts. Okay, so let's take a look at how we might develop a range of assessments for the same outcome depending on our desired depth of knowledge. So we're going to take a look at that outcome that we saw earlier. Using course notes and a Venn diagram template, the student will compare and contrast the ideology and political characteristics of 2 early American presidents with at least 5 characteristics for each president. So at depth of knowledge 1, the assessment, acquired knowledge, recall and reproduction, remembering facts or defining a procedure, our assessment would basically be that very simple part: create a Venn diagram in which you compare and contrast a minimum of 5 political characteristics of 2 early American presidents. This is the lowest level of complexity for the assessment. We can simply assess the student's ability to recall and organize information. If that's all we want to know that they can do, then we're done. If we want more complexity, we can add to this assessment. Create a Venn diagram in which you compare and contrast a minimum of 5 political characteristics of 2 early American presidents that illustrate where their ideologies overlapped and diverged. So if we want to make this assessment slightly more complex, we might ask students to answer a question using that recalled knowledge. In this instance, the question is, where do the president's ideologies overlap and diverge? Adding a 3rd layer of complexity allows us to incorporate analysis and ask students to make connections and use complex reasoning skills. So after the first two parts of this assessment, we're going to include then Trace one overlapping ideology through succeeding presidents to the development of a new policy or law or to its conclusion. So now we're asking students for strategic thinking and complex reasoning, okay? We're asking them to take this basic knowledge, right? Apply it by answering a question, and now let's go a little bit further. Let's take it all the way up to depth of knowledge 4. So if we wanted to add the highest level of complexity to our assessment of this particular outcome, we might ask students to consider real-world applications of the learning. And by that, we're going to add a question at the end. What might this tell us about presidential impact on policy or lawmaking? And so now we're asking students to extend their thinking, extend their learning, and go into real-world contexts. So in this example, we can see how we might also scaffold and organize the content of our instruction. So helping students with the lower levels of knowledge acquisition and then moving them up Bloom's taxonomy to prepare them for an increasingly complex evaluation. You could, theoretically, give students this assessment in 4 different parts as you taught them, right? So you would teach them the basics, facts, okay? Get 5 political characteristics of 2 early American presidents. Those are basic facts that students can learn, they can memorize, and they can recall them. And then you can move toward, right, discussing ideologies and how those ideologies overlap and where they diverge. And then you could move them toward tracing those ideologies through succeeding presidents past the 2 that they selected, and so on and so forth. So you can see how we can scaffold and organize the content of our instruction as well as the content of our assessments of this one outcome. Okay, we're gonna take a breather. That's a lot. I know, that's a lot of information. So what I want you to do, you've got your 4 depths of knowledge here. I want you to take the learning outcome that you just drafted, and I want you to determine the depth of knowledge you'd like to achieve in the development of your assessment. So do you want to assess a student's ability to recall and remember facts? Do you want to push them a little further and ask them a question to apply that knowledge? Do you want to take it all the way up to depth of level 3 or all the way up to depth of level 4? You decide. Draft a 1 or 2 sentence description of your assessment that directly aligns to your course learning outcome and that demonstrates your chosen depth of knowledge. So I'm actually going to step back 1 slide so that you can see where each depth of knowledge is applied in this particular assessment. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I know it's not much time. We're not trying to create the Mona Lisa here, but I'm going to give you 2 minutes to just sort of play around with it a little bit and see how you might write the instruction for that assessment based on depth of knowledge. We're going to take 2 minutes. All right, how are we doing? So I hope that you're starting to see, right, that a well-constructed learning outcome and an attention to depth of knowledge can help you to build a really meaningful assessment that truly measures what it is that you want students to be able to perform and demonstrate for you in order to demonstrate mastery of that outcome. There are many ways, I hope you're starting to see, many ways that one might assess any given learning outcome. We just wrote, in this last example here, four different assessments. Four different assessments, okay? The blue is an assessment by itself. The blue and orange together is a second assessment. Blue, orange, and gray is a third, and all four colors together is a fourth different assessment. All right, so I hope that you can see there are many ways that we might be able to assess any given learning outcome. And using Bloom's taxonomy in conjunction with Webb's depth of knowledge helps us begin to see paths toward more clearly scaffolded instruction and more meaningful assessment strategies. The last thing we're going to look at in developing more meaningful assessments is looking at the 3 Ps, what I call the 3 Ps of alternative assessments: performative, project-based, and portfolio assessments. So performative assessments are offered as alternative. They're sometimes called authentic assessments, and that should tell you something, right? If we need a marker, a demarcation of assessments that are authentic, that tells me that we have a lot of assessments out there that are not authentic, that are not measuring actual outcomes, right? They're not giving us true and meaningful data of how our students are learning. So performative assessments, sometimes called authentic, are offered as an alternative to the traditional seated exam. And they are essentially any assessment that requires a student to perform a task rather than to select an answer or to fill in a blank on a quiz. As with any alternative assessment, I'm going to give you this caveat: developing a clear rubric is essential to ensuring not only that students have a clear understanding of how to be successful on that assessment, but also to ensure that you are actually assessing your course learning outcomes. So we can get really off track in developing performative assessments if we don't develop a rubric alongside with it to keep us aligned to that course learning outcome. So performative assessments require students to perform a task. They allow students to think more critically and creatively, and they ask students to apply their content knowledge to solving real world problems, which takes us all the way up to depth of knowledge level 4. So these are very complex assessments. And here I've provided you a list of examples. Many of these you probably already use, right? Explain historical events. So rather than doing a multiple choice quiz or fill in the blank, ask your students to actually explain to you the historical event. Generate a scientific hypothesis, solve math problems. Those are always highly complex assessments. Converse in a foreign language. Conduct research, perform dance and musical composition, and any kind of speech or presentation that provides information. Ask your students to teach a skill, to report on their progress, or to persuade others. These are all performative assessments, ways that we can gauge a student's mastery of an outcome that differ from the traditional seated exam. Project-based assessments are essentially longer, more in-depth versions of performance assessments. These assessments often span the range of the depth of knowledge scale, and they can easily take anywhere from several days to several months to the entire course term to complete. Again, building clear and well-defined rubrics for each stage of the project keeps both the instructor and the student focused and on track for demonstrating mastery of those course learning outcomes. So I've given you some examples here. Conduct field research, determine the impact on the local watershed. Redesign a public space to make it more environmentally sustainable. Use data to tell a story designed to move the community to action. Conduct market research analysis to help a small local business. Or tell the untold story of a community through photography or film, through poetry, any medium, really. And you'll see that a lot of these project-based assessments also sort of fall into the bucket of service learning. So if you have any experience with service learning, where students are asked to actually engage with and interact with their community and to serve their community in some way, and in doing so, they are learning skills, they are learning knowledge, and they are demonstrating their mastery of those skills and knowledge through the project. Finally, portfolio assessments can be a truly authentic way to evaluate a student's mastery of your course learning outcomes. Portfolios can demonstrate growth, they can showcase achievements, and they can document progress toward outcome mastery. Portfolios almost always come with a reflective component, and just like all other alternative assessments, require a clear and specific rubric for the best results. And you can see here that a portfolio assessment can go through depth of knowledge 2, 3, 4. And some examples might be art projects that demonstrate a variety of mediums and techniques. Likewise, written work, which could demonstrate progression from draft stage to final version, could also demonstrate a variety of genres. And any kind of a capstone portfolio that assembles a variety of materials, examples, works in progress. But I think the key component to portfolio assessments is really the reflection component. And that is where we ask students to truly evaluate and reflect on their progress through the course and on their mastery of those course learning outcomes. So your course learning outcomes should not be a secret to your students, right? They should know what those outcomes are and what they're striving to master. And then a portfolio gives them an opportunity to really reflect on how well they mastered those outcomes. For the final activity, we're not going to set a timer for this because it's going to take more than just a couple of minutes for you to consider how you might develop more meaningful, authentic assessments to measure your students' success in meeting your course learning outcomes. Instead, I want us to consider this the beginning of a long reflection on how we assess our students' mastery of outcomes and how we might do so in much more meaningful ways. So reflecting on the course learning outcome and the assessment description that you've drafted so far, how do you imagine you might be able to develop an alternative, authentic assessment for that course outcome? What other outcomes might you be able to wrap up into an alternative assessment? And how would you scaffold your instruction and your instructional activities to build toward that alternative assessment? If you want to chat about that, I think this is a good opportunity to do that. But what we've done here today is we have discussed how to develop measurable and demonstrable learning outcomes. We've determined the depth of knowledge level for your assessments. I have a typo in that. I'm going to fix that right now. And we have developed alternative, authentic, we've talked about developing alternative, authentic assessments. I want to thank you for participating in this webinar. We've covered a lot of ground, but I hope that you've been given some tools to help you do these things in all of your courses moving forward. Thanks to our chat facilitators, Paige Durham of Germanna Community College, and I know that Sherry Prupis and Terry Harmon were also in there. Thank you so much. Please let us know how we did by completing this survey. Someone will drop that into the chat for you. And there's also some links to some additional resources on project-based assessment, performance-based assessments, using alternative assessments, and then obviously for Bloom's and Webb's learning theories, and a little bit of another resource on writing learning objectives. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and I hope you guys have a great day.